What's wrong with you? Huh? No, I can't have a whole Pima crew standing right now. It's not going to work. No. Sit down. Okay. I wanna do a series about great kashrus machleksim that happened over the generations. There's many interesting foods and personalities and svarim that were written and that dealt with these kashrus machleksim, but I want to give a bit of hakdama to the sugya of kashrus machleksim with some relatively basic information. Some of it more, some of it less, but let's give a basic hakdama. Everybody knows that the Torah in Parsha Shmini is mitzvah us about which foods are permissible to eat as a Jew, which foods are not permissible to eat. The Shulchan Aruch, the Gemara on Chulin spends a bunch of blätter explaining all the different simanei kashrus, what's kosher, what's not kosher. The simanim in Shulchan Aruch, there's a whole bunch of simanim in Shulchan Aruch. Now, the basic idea, I think everyone knows since they're a kid, is that when you eat something that's not kosher, there's timtum halev. Right? There's something called timtum halev, and the opposite, when you eat something that is kosher, it gives you the right koiches and the right abilities to do what you need to do. And I just want to give the background to that, explain the concept of timtum halev, and we'll move forward into the actual kashrus disputes following that. So really the idea of timtum halev starts from a Gemara. So let's start like this. It actually has to do with this past week's parsha. Chazal in many places throughout Shas say that goyim have zuama. Now, it's not clear what zuama means, but the Gemara directly, l'mashal, in Shabbos and Daf Kuf Mem Hey Amid Beis, the Gemara says, Mipnei ma'i v'dikachavim mezuhayim. The Gemara asks it like directly. It's a known fact that Avdikachavim have zuama. Why do Avdikachavim have zuama? And the Gemara over there says, B'shashe ba nachash al chava, when the nachash, did what he did with chava, hitl ba zuama, he inserted some zuama. Yisrael, the Amdul Fnei Ar Sinai, Klal Yisrael that stood in front of Ar Sinai, so pasku mehem zuamasam. The zuama dissipated, it went away. But if the Kechavim, the Amdul Fnei Ar Sinai, so loy paska zuamasam. The zuama didn't dissipate, and therefore they still have zuama. That's what the Gemara in Shabbos Daf Kuf Mem Hey says. But in several other places throughout Shas, in Avodah Zarah and in Shabbos itself and Daf Pevav, the Gemara says the reason why the Kechavim have zuama is the achli shkatzi uramasi. They eat treif. They eat creepy crawlies. The achli shkatzi ramasi. That's why they have zuama. That's what the Gemara says. Now, it's hard to know exactly what zuama is, and what the medical condition of zuama exactly is. It's hard to put our finger on. And I'm not going to go into the stira in these different chazals. But one chazal is saying different sibas for zuama, and chazal use zuama by yidden also. We'll see. I'm not going to get into the stira and exactly try to define what zuama is, but suffice to say, the Chazal clearly say that there's an impact, a zuama impact that happens when someone eats shkatzi ramasi. That the Gemara says. Now, at Hechan Advar Magiyim, what does that zuama? What does that zuama do? What could the zuama do? So the Gemara of Zara on the Flamid Aleph Amid Aleph, the Gemara brings as follows. The Gemara says, Hani aramoy zuknoi. These old goyim, they have a shasu giluya. They would eat from mashkin that was left megula. We know that maya megulam, water that's left out over, not overnight, water that's left out for any period of time that a snake could get to it and deposit his venom into it, is not allowed to be drunk. Now, whether that din applies today, it doesn't apply today, sugya farzich. But the Gemara over there, when the din was betakfa, when the din certainly applied, says there are old goyim that they drink giloy all the time, v'lei mesu, they don't die. And the Gemara presents this as a question. How could we say that giloy is so terrible, so dangerous? There are plenty of old goyim who are drinking, this guy's been smoking till his 95th birthday. That's what the Gemara is asking. How can you tell me it's dangerous? And the Gemara answers, Aidi da achli shkatzim ramasim, since they eat shkatzim ramasim, chavel gufayu. Since they eat shkatzim ramasim, it does something to their body. And whatever that does to their body allows them to drink water that potentially has the venom of a snake in it, and it doesn't damage them. They're fine, they could go weiter. So, clearly the Gemara is understanding the zuama, that's the impact of achilas, shkatzim ramasim, the zuama, is a physical phenomenon. It's not a spiritual phenomenon, it's a physical phenomenon. When one eats things that are treif, the zuama that's imparted into him is something that has physical ramifications. Ad kedei kach, that there are these old goyim who are eating, drinking mayim megolim, and nothing happens to them because they're impervious to the effects of mayim megolim. Now, Taisvis Afanart asks an interesting question. Taisvis asks that in the Gemara in Shabbos and Daf Pevav, the Gemara says, Klal Yisrael, who are daigi b'mitzvahs, who are very concerned about making sure they all have mitzvahs, chavel gufayu. The Gemara uses the same sprach. Just like the Gemara says over here, that the goyim who eat treif are chavel gufayu, The Gemara says Yisrael that a daigi b'mitzvahs are chavel gufayu. So Taisus asks, so it was a Yidden should also be able to drink mayim ugulam, nothing should happen to them because they're also chavel gufayu. And Taisus says, and this is a line which is interesting to what we're saying. Taisus says Yesh leimar leinin lehinatzel me'eres ein moyel chavel the daigi b'mitzvahs k'moy chavel da'achil shkatzim ramasim. Taisus says there's a distinction. The chavel by mitzvahs, that doesn't give you the same protection that chavel from eating shatzim matzim. Why he says sheyesh leim b'toich haguf u'mevatel eres shel nachash. The chavel that comes from eating shatzim matzim, that's built into the body. That becomes like a physical thing. That's like something physical that the guy has in him that's able to protect him from mayim gulam. As opposed to the chavel of a Jew who's tar b'mitzvahs, that just means chavel like this. It doesn't mean chavel like physical chavel. It means chavel gufayu. They wear themselves down because they're so trudim in Esek HaMitzvahs, but not a physical chavel gufayu like we're saying by a guy. So you see clearly, Taisus understood the Gemara of Avodah Zarah to mean a very, very physical manifestation of the chavel gufayu. The timtam alev that we discussed that comes from eating tarfus, Taisus understood to mean, very, very physical to the body. Now, there are many, interesting different mahalchim. When the Torah says not to eat treif, the Torah doesn't say any reason. Like a lot of things in the Torah. The Torah doesn't give a reason for not eating treif. But in the different Rishonim, there are many different, hasbaras that are given to not eat treif, and some of them are very much along this vein. For example, there's a letter that's miyuchas to the Ramban. Today, I think the Welt says it's not the Ramban, it's just someone from Bnei Deiroi. But in the Kol Kisvei Ramban, there's a letter there that's miyuchas to the Ramban, where the Ramban discusses the issue of eating tarfus. And the Ramban says, since a person, he is comprised, you are what you eat, the Ramban says, you are what you eat, you're comprised of what you eat. He says, and therefore, lefichach, hivdilenu yisparach b'teiraseh, HaKadosh Baruch Hu separated us with his Torah HaKadosha, mikala machalas, from several different food groups. He says, ktsason, metamenes halev. Some of them, they impact the lev, the metam of the lev, kechel v'dam. Ktsason, shema'azenes hapanim kechayes v'oifis, ubehemes adarses. Some of them give you like a great azis in your face, like wild animals. Ktsason, he says, shepoigim dalsei havana. They diminish a person's ability to understand things, to understand Torah, chachma. He says, some of them just give you illnesses. They give you things that are not good for you physically, basic physically. He says, Seif davar al kulam amar, and all these categories of foods that have an actual physical pagam that damage a person, the Torah says, al teshaktus nafshei seichem. Don't be meshaketz your guf by eating them. He says the Ramban, the Torah was made dias by using the language about the shaktu, that all these things leave a physical impact on a person that damages his ability, in all different categories. Each one of them is in a different category. Now, Rabbeinu Yoina in his Pirush al Torah says very similarly. The Rikanti takes it even further. He says the reason why the Torah aser behemes hatmeis lefi pshat ki he melidin ifush ra v'chayli b'nafshes u'ma'akvin shleimas ha'adam milistabik b'shem yisbarach. They make a physical weakness in a person that prevents him from being able to serve Hashem and to get close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to do his avodas hachayim. Now, the nafkamina of all this, of this being like a purely physical manifestation, is when this became very popular to discuss this was in Monsey. I don't know what is it already, 15 years ago, whenever it was, that story, when everyone, Tayvim B'Shleimim, Yireim B'Shleimim, people who would never do an Aveira B'Kavana, who would never eat anything that they're not allowed to eat, were nichshal and eating tarfus for who knows how many years, in all sorts of HaTanya's, etc. And the Ar Yisrael Kuntras from Monsey, the Kuntras Ar Yisrael that comes out all the time, put out a whole volume after that of all different Rabbanim handling the Timtum Alev of something that you eat that was shalei b'kavana. Because according to the way these Rishonim are describing the Timtum Alev, and according to the Chazal seem to describe the Timtum Alev, that it has a physical manifestation, meaning that by eating something that's not good for you, that the Torah said is not good for you, you physically become damaged. L'chayra, it shouldn't matter if you ate it on purpose, or you ate it by mistake. There should be no chilik between mezid and oinus. The full gamut of intentions that a person could have between mezid and oinus, there should be no chilik, because whatever it is, you consumed it, you internalized it, now it's part of you. And whatever damage it's able to impart, it's able to impart. It shouldn't matter. And there was major back and forths, about the tshuva components, about the Timtum Alev components, etc. But one of the primary sources for it, and where it tells the Chayes in Shulchan Aruch, meaning this din of Timtum Alev, ba'inus, or Timtum Alev that comes, be'etzem nevela, isn't in Shulchan Aruch. There's not a sif in Shulchan Aruch that says ha'eichel nevela, shkatzim ramasim mitames liba. It's not a din in Shulchan Aruch. In Shulchan Aruch it just says what you can eat and what you can't eat. It never says, what the ramifications are. Now, where you see it in Shulchan Aruch is as following. There's a din in Siman Pei Aleph and Shulchan Aruch, and let's just back it up a little bit. There's really a steer in the Gemara. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah and the Lamed Vav brings a Mishnah. If a non-Jewish woman is allowed to nurse in the time when there was nursemaids, is a non-Jewish woman allowed to nurse a Jewish baby, and vice versa? Could a Jewish mother nurse a non-Jewish baby? The Gemara brings a machlekes about it. One man says can't do it at all, mishum the chashid al ratzicha, because the chavim are chashid to kill the babies. Don't leave a baby entrusted in under the protection of a non-Jewish nursemaid. The other man says no, as long as the Yisrael nichnas v'yotze, a Jew is someone Rav Hechsher, a little bit of an oversight. No problem, he says. That's one Gemara. That's the mission of Avodah Zarah. The Gemara in Yevamos and Daf Kufi Daled says that in a case where there's other options, it's not a sakanas nefashis, where you could choose either a Jewish nurse or a non-Jewish nurse, and one chooses a non-Jewish nurse, says the Gemara, it's ki yonik sheketz. It's like you're being yonik sheketz. So really you have a kind of a steerus HaGemara. So Rabbeinu Hananel says that the Gemara in Yevamos is the primary Gemara, and it's ki yonik sheketz. It's chalav akum, meaning human chalav akum, not chalav akum, the way we usually think of it. Human chalav akum is aser, says Rabbeinu Hananel. It's ki yonik sheketz. Comes along the Rashba, and the Rashba is in Yevamos, the Rashba is in Avodah Zarah, the Rashba is in Tshuva, all over the Rashba does this work, where he says as follows. He says, clearly from the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, the Gemara held it's not aser. You can't say that it's aser be'etzem. That's not possible. The Gemara says clearly, there's no chaylik in that Mishnah. Both man the Amrim say it's mutter medina. One man the Amr just says, for security purposes, don't leave your child entrusted in someone who could be dangerous to your child. But that it's mutter is clear from the Gemara in Avodah Zarah. He says, what's the Gemara in Yevamos referring to when it says ki yonik sheketz? He says as follows, the Isa Ba'agada, he says, I found the Medrash, and this is a famous Medrash, that when Moshe Rabbeinu was abandoned in the water and he was picked up at Basya, so it says the Isa Medrash Agada, that Basya took him around to all the women who could nurse in Mitzrayim, and he was not masking to nurse from any one of them. Amar, it says, Kaviyachal Moshe Rabbeinu said as a baby, Pesha asid l'daber mashchina yoichal davar tamei, the mouth that in the future is going to talk to the Shekhinah should eat something like this, and he wouldn't nurse. So says the Rashba, Vaistais, that the Iker Hadin, it's Zichem Mutter to eat the chalav of a non-Jewish woman. He says, Nevas, all it is the Yonik Sheketz means Timtum Alev. And this is taking it a step further. Here you're taking something that's not even Aser, but Machmas, a little bit of extra, extra feeling, that just out the Timtum Alev Shabai, we're creating an Isser. He says, when the Gemara Yevamos says not to do it, the Yonik Sheketz, it's purely out Timtum Alev. It's not at all out Isser Achila. There's no Isser Achila. The nafkamina would be, obviously, where the woman's, let's say, a Jewish mother who's nursing, who's ill, and needs to eat food that she's not normally allowed to eat. Could she eat it and then nurse her child? Or do you say, no, in this case, have someone else nurse the baby? Because even though you ate it beheter, because you're allowed to eat it now, but the Yonik Sheketz is still there. The Timtum Alev is still going to be there. For example, now, one detail over here. It's interesting to me, the Rashba chooses to bring the Medrash. The Rashba says the Isab Medrash Agada. Now, it's this concept that Moshe Rabbeinu refused to nurse and had to be taken to his mother to be nursed is a Mefurish Gemara in Saita. The Gemara in Saita in Dafid Beis and Beis says Kemat the same story. So it's strange that the Rashba would go to Isa Medrash Rabbah in Parsha Shemais to bring the Makar for this. It's a Mefurish Gemara. It's a Chazal. Chazal in the Gemara in Saita say it exactly. Now, I think Libi Yomrili, the reason for this is, if you look in the Medrash asks it as a kasha. The Medrash says, Hechsher, they brought him around to every nursemaid, so he should nurse, he wouldn't nurse, because he said, Pekadish, Frek the Gemara, V'chi Aser Lanik, the mission of Avodah Zarah. The Medrash asks it. It's not Aser. And the Medrash answers, Amar, Pesha Aser L'daber. So I think the Rashba liked that the Gemara in Saita you could just interpret as something miyuchad to Moshe Rabbeinu. It's like a Moshe Rabbeinu thing. It's not something that you could, there's nothing to take from there to every person. Moshe Rabbeinu was Murim Mikalam. You can't take anything. The Rashba liked from the Medrash that the Medrash applies it to everybody. The Medrash says the Timtum, the Medrash sells it to the regular din for everybody, the din in Avodah Zarah, and says no, even though the mission of Avodah Zarah says it's mutter, there's still the Timtum aspect. Now this din of not being yonik, that is gebracht in Shulchan Aruch. In Siman Pei Aleph, in Siv Zayin.
Is the Timtum because it's from a guy or because the guy should maybe ate?
So, some say some, there's both versions of that. There's both versions of that. But the Ramah, what do you say? Yeah, that's the different checkets. Yeah, the Gemara in Ksubis. Yeah, no. So over here, the Ramah in Siman Pei Aleph, Siv Zayin, the Ramah brings as follows. He says, Chalav mitzris kechalav Yisraelis. Straight din. Chalav mitzvahs is kosher, just like the chalav of Yisraelis. Mikol makim, lo yaniku tinik min ha-mitzvahs, im efshir bi-Yisraelis. This is like the Gemara in Yivamis. If you have a choice, don't be yanik. The chalav of edes kechavim metamtem halev, it's metamtem the lev, u'moilid lo teva ra. It causes timtam halev, and it's moilid in the child of teva ra. So here you have the Ramah paskening lahedya, like the component of kashrus, that's timtam halev. Meaning normally, by things that are regular treif, you don't have to divorce the two sugyas. No problem. It's treif, which is the superseding isser. It's treif. That's the primary thing to talk about. Yeah, rather also the symptom alev. It's going to do real damage to you, and etc. Over here, in a case where it's not treif, is where you see the Rashba divorcing the Rashba and the Ramah divorcing these two dinim. Okay, it's not treif, but you still have the symptom alev aspect. So now, and the Rashba and the Ramah is clearly saying it in the way of it leaving a physical rishim, like symptom alev leaves a physical mark on the child in a way that, therefore, even though it's not usser, it's not worth doing. Now, this is not something that's Muslim lakol. The Taz, the Shach, etc., the Bach, the Taz, the Shach, they agree with the Ramah. Others are chelik in the Ramah, and the nafkamina would obviously be, someone who ate tarfus by mistake, if he needs to do tshuva, if there's timtum alev by him, if there's not. But b'chol life, when you see the concept of timtum alev being a very real and very physical, implication on the person's body. Now, I just want to share a story on this Indian of timtum alev. In regards to the Shaila, I don't know, you can't pass him from the story, but there was a story as follows. In Pozna, where Kvega was the Rav, there was a child, a 14-year-old boy, who never progressed past like the level of a 5-6-year-old in learning. That's what he was up to. He never got past that. And his parents, I guess at that time, in that kuf, I think you were getting married about then, were getting exasperated that their child was like an overgrown child. He couldn't really learn. And they went to Reb Kveger and they asked Reb Kveger, like, could you give us an eitzah, something that he should see some success in his learning? Kveger listened and he said, so tell me, so when's the last time that he learned good? He said second grade was his last great year. Second grade, Imam Knak, that was his last great year. After that, nothing really, it stagnated. So Kveger said, Libi Omerli, I think this sounds like tarfus. This sounds like a child who ate tarfus. So the parents are taken aback. They're aghast. We have a regular kosher home. You know us. We eat from the Rav Shchita. We don't tarfus. No way. It can never have happened. It sounds to me like this is a tarfus thing. Go look into it. See if you can figure anything out. So the parents go back. They pull the child aside and tell us, do you ever eat by a friend's house? Do you have any friends who give you food? Is there somebody you go to? No, nothing. Did you ever once maybe went like talking until they finally remember that when he was 6 years old, second grade taka, he went to a chasana in town of a guy whose name was, I forget his name, but he had a name. He went to this guy's chasana. It was a second wedding, a zivug sheni in the town of Pozna. It was a very happy event. He was a 55-year-old man who was finally getting married a second time, and he went to the chasana and he ate, and it was wonderful. I said, okay, let's analyze that one, because that's the only outside, shchutei chutz that you ever ate. So they track down the owner of the hall, and they ask the owner of the hall, tell us a little bit about that chasana. He says, I remember that chasana was very happy when this guy had a second marriage. It was a big simcha in town, and we had the sheichet, so-and-so, shecht, tens of chickens. It was a huge simcha. Everybody really partook. It was beautiful. So, follow the chain. They go on to the sheichet, and they ask the sheichet, is anything different about this chasana from any other chasana? And the sheichet's face turns white. He says, you're still coming, Pete. Oh, it's 10 years from that, and I'm still getting petch from that. I thought I put it behind me. And the parents are, what do you mean? What happened? You shechted, something was wrong. It was treif. He says, of course not. What do you chayshid me that I'm a machal, I'm a chayte machtis arabim, a machal nevelas arabim? Of course not. Chas v'shalom, it wasn't treif. So he said, so what's the story? What happened? He says, here's the story. There was this person who was having his zivug sheni, was once married back in the day in Liozhny, in the town of the Baal HaTanya, a totally different sector of Europe, hundreds of miles away. He was married in the town of Liozhny, and over there he got divorced from his first wife, and there was an error on the get. The wife's name was Rachel, but everyone called her Rosie, and they wrote in the get only Rachel. They didn't write Amachona Rosie. They didn't write the other name. And the Baal HaTanya held that this get was puzzle. It was a get puzzle in Gansen. It's not a kosher get. And the Baal HaTanya wrote in a tshuva about this get that this guy, it's not a good get, and the only leverage that we have over him is that he cannot get married again until he straightens it out with his wife, that he's leaving over here without a get. And whoever partakes in his wedding it's a terrible thing. And whoever shechts the food for his wedding, shchitas nevela. This is what the Baal HaTanya wrote. And he says, and I had heard of this, in the background, but I didn't know, it's not such a serious thing. And I ignored it. I shechted. I took the gig. And then a few days later, an actual letter from the Baal HaTanya arrived in Pozna to an Alta Lubavitcher Chassid who lived there. He showed me the letter, and ever since then, I've been eating myself up that I served the Veilus Trefus to people. Now, it happens to be, I don't know if the story, how do I know if the story happened? It didn't happen, but it happens to be that the tshuva, the letter from the Baal HaTanya, is in the Shailos HaTshuvas, in the back of the Shulchan Aruch Harav. There's a small handful of Shailos HaTshuvas. In Tshuva Lamed Tes, the tshuva over there, the Baal HaTanya says, the tshuva is there, the story's there. Nivhalti Me'Rois, he says of a story, Beget Pasal Midiraisa, Shekasavu V'Aget Shem Ha'isha Rachel. Even though she had a nickname, and he spells out how the nickname should be spelled, he says it's a terrible thing, it's not true. And then in the last line in the tshuva, he says as follows, Befrat B'Gzeres Chachamim Al HaSheichtim. I'm making a Gzeres Chachamim on the Sheichtim, Shalai Yishchatu Al HaChasan Chas V'Shalom. They shouldn't shecht for this man's future wedding. Shum Behem Avoif. V'im Yavru Chas V'Shalom. If they're over on this Gzeres Chachamim that I'm making that they shouldn't shecht, Tei Shchitasan Nevela Kedin, Tei Shchitasan Nevela. Let their shchita be a shchitas nevela. Kedin ha'ivr v'chulu. L'shem imyunun v'tavei le'em bracha tayv me'es Hashem ha'chaysim shnei zalm baruch. So the letter, the tshuva from the Baal HaTanya, saying this, that there is a story with a get like this and the thing. So now I don't know if someone built the rest of the story around this tshuva from the Baal HaTanya or vice versa, But b'chalav and Shia, the story definitely drives home this nekuda that we're saying, that Timtum Alev is mitziyuti. It's a real impact. It leaves a real mark. It's not something that's like Timtum Alev. It's something. It's a real thing. In the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah takes it seriously so much to paskin just Timtum Alev in a case where it's not actually tarfus. And this story of the Kveger and the Baal HaTanya drives home the same nekuda. Now I'll just share. There's a few even odd details of how weit this goes. Meaning, basically, what has to come out of this is that a Jewish body and a non-Jewish body are different. Right? Physically, they're different. Meaning, maybe you put them in an MRI, you can't tell the difference, you're not going to be able to see the difference, but it has to be that there's a difference. According to what all these Rishonim are saying, their bodies are different. Now, Ad Hechan Advar Magiyim, so I'll tell you two very interesting outcroppings of this Yisod. So what's the guf and what's the Shama? So listen. So that's exactly. Listen, I'll take Advar Magim. I'll tell you. I'm going to tell you two. Obviously I'll say I struggle with the same thing. Meaning, if you put them under an MRI, of course they're going to look the same, and we'll have to see how that shtel zechais ladina. But I want to tell you two ways that the shtel zechais in a very interesting way. Number one is the Chasam Sofer in many places. The Chasam Sofer in Avodah Zarah, the Chasam Sofer in Shabbos, and the Chasam Sofer LaHalacha in a Tshuva Berachos Nida says this in three different places that I know of, that a doctor whose medical knowledge is predicated on experiments that he conducted on non-Jews cannot extrapolate from their information for a Jewish body. Sofer says that LaHalacha to Shaila of an Isha who's Roya Machmas Tashmish, a Shaila Chamura, where she'd have to leave her wife if you can't figure it out. And we have a doctor who says, I've conducted experiments and X, Y, and Z will solve the problem. Says the Chasam Sofer, you have to be Chayshish Chumra. If the experiments are only based on knowledge that was obtained from now many Heintige Paiskim handle this and say that today that medical knowledge is all based on scans and actual tests, physical tests. So it's called Davide Legluye. It's something that, meaning the doctor's really just revealing to you something that you don't have the training to see on your own. He's not telling you anything. There's no chiddush. Every doctor, all of science that we practice today is really just uncovering something you don't have the skills or the language or the techniques to reveal. So a doctor's revealing that for you. That's not called being saimich on the doctor's prowess. You're not being saimich on giluyim that the doctor, built out of thing. And therefore, what do you say? Maybe the treatment, but the fact pattern, what it's based on, meaning the guf, the physical guf that the doctor is basing his information on, that comes from, he's doing scans. It's facts. So Mela, this din of the Chasam Sofer wouldn't apply, but where I saw that it applies in a second context, which blew my mind, and again, this is not the din, is as follows. There's a tshuva from the Chelkas Yaakov, of Breish from Switzerland, who's not that long ago. I don't know what the tshuva is, from 1960 maybe. Someone wrote to him, he needs to get blood transfusions. He's sick, he's getting treatment, he needs to get blood transfusions. And he wants to know if there's a milah to only get blood transfusions from Jewish blood, as opposed to from non-Jewish blood. And the Chelkas Yaakov takes it extremely seriously and goes through all these Gemaras with Temtem Alev and the zuama, and etc. And he says, listen, if it's a sakana, you're going to die if you don't take the blood. Then avada sakana is deicha everything. It's a pikuach nefesh deicha kol terikula. But if it's not mamash sakana, then I'm very partial, he says, to what you're telling me about not wanting to have this non-Jewish blood, the zuama, the timtum alev, and just like he says, just like chalav from an avedis kechavim is moiled teva ra. We know the Gemara compares chalav and dam to each other in many different places, b'chayris and chulin. So yeah, mistama the dam of a guy could also be moiled teva ra. And he says it kemat lahalacha. Now, if you're going to ask any pasuk, if you can look in any medical sefer, the halacha is not like this. If one ever needs to go to hospital and have a blood transfusion, this is not the halacha. You're allowed to take a blood transfusion from a non-Jew. It isn't treif. But the Chalkas Yaakov takes it extremely seriously and says also not a problem. Yeah, also not a problem. So now, I thought this was like a different Matthias, exactly. So I thought this was like the Chalkas Yaakov. I found last night that the Panovich Rav, who was a very regular person, was twice hospitalized in New York City, in Mount Sinai Hospital. Now, in the book, the Panovich Rav Harav Panovich, they claim that exactly the dates of the hospitalization. In theory, one should be able to fact check the story and go look up the records. But what they say, the story that's presented is as follows: the Panovich Rav was hospitalized in New York City in Mount Sinai early on, like 18 years before he was nifter. And he needed a blood transfusion. And as they were going to give him blood, he told the doctor, who was a Jew, that I need to only have Yiddish blood. I can't have any blood. It's not going to work for me. And the doctor, thinking that this is a ridiculous thing, Rabbi, I'm going to give you whatever you say, I'm giving you, 100%, only Jewish blood. And as they were about to give him the blood transfusion, the Panovich Rav started to scream, said, I only want Jewish blood. It's not going to work for me. It's not going to work for me. And the doctor said, had you know, I could tell, stop. And they stop, and in the book of it, they bring a name of a Torah Vadas Talmud who was in Williamsburg at the time, who they brought down to the hospital to donate the blood. I'll tell you his name. I don't know what to make of this, but his name was it's in here somewhere. I'll find it after. But exactly. The name of the Talmud from Torah Vadas who was called down to donate blood in this situation. And the Panovich Rav took the blood, and happy ever after. 18 years later, Panovich Rav was sick again. This is the sick that he was going to die from. He was again in New York City collecting money, and he was again hospitalized in Mount Sinai Hospital, and again needed a blood transfusion. When the doctor comes into the room, the Panovich Rav again gives him the same instructions. He says, I only take Jewish blood, and the doctor tells him, Rabbi, I treat hundreds, maybe thousands of Jewish patients. This is the first time in my entire life that I've ever heard someone say that. You don't need Jewish blood. This is what he tells him. So the Panovich Rav tells him, I'm telling you, it's not the first time that this hospital has heard this request, and it's not even the first time that this hospital has shtoled suit to this request. Go look up my records from 18 years ago, and you'll see that I can have different types of blood. And they looked it up. They said, okay, fine. If you did it once, we'll do it again. And they gave him the blood he wanted. Now, make of what you want, but the Chalkas Yaakov is not lahalacha, and the Panovich Rav is a story full of names and dates, so technically it should be fact-checkable. But al kapanim, these people were looking at tarfus and anything that was fed by tarfus or satiated by tarfus as physically different, as physically damaging and physically different, and something that you need to stay away from, at all costs. Now, obviously, the flip side, and I don't want to go for too long, but the flip side is the kosher food and the milas that it imparts. The Chafetz Chaim in the Sefer Nidchei Yisrael that he wrote for soldiers who were going out to battle spends first 2 chapters saying how detrimental and terrible non-kosher food is for a Jew, and then he continues on. He brings many zayars and how someone who eats kosher food, it gives him the right type of koiches, and it allows him to come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the shleimus, and and zulu mazu. If there's all the negative, there's going to be all the positive on the other side. Now, I'll just say one nakuda. Where you'll see the positives of food, like expressed, is obviously in Hasidic literature related to Shabbos food. When it comes to, let's say, achilas dagam on Shabbos. Now, dagam on Shabbos is a Gemara. The Gemara on Shabbos in Kuf Yivches says that for Einik Shabbos, a person should eat dagim gedalim. Now, in the Kisvei Ari, in the Tikkunei Zayar, it says much more lofty things about eating dagam on Shabbos, and ad kedei kach that the Magen Avram in Siman Reish Mem Beis brings from the Kisvei Arizal that a person should be makbid to eat fish all 3 meals of Shabbos, not just one. Al pi the Kisvei Ari and the Zayar, a person should be makbid to eat fish all 3 meals. Now, if you look at the Chassidus Zoharim that follow after that, you'll find the reasons given marvelous, meaning each one's greater and more interesting than the next. About gilgulim, about tzadikim and fish, about fish being connected to liv yasan, about fish being histapkas, etc., etc. Meaning, if you want to find the people who, expound on the milas of kosher food and what specific foods could do to a person to help him, you'll find in the Chassidish Svarim. Now, there is just one nakuda that I want to say over about fish on Shabbos that's not from Chassidish Sefer, that's very, very much halacha, and again, you'll see this concept. The Magen Avraham brings down from a Tzemach Tzedek, not the Lubavitcher Tzemach Tzedek, the first Tzemach Tzedek, Rav Nachman L'Krachmal. Shaila as follows. He says, Ovid Kichavim, who were fishmongers, who would sell the fish, and they would jack up the prices like crazy for Jews. It might ring a bell. They would jack up the prices like crazy on Shabbos food, and no one had a choice, and they had to buy the food, right? So the Tzemach Tzedek was presented, could we make a boycott? And say for 2 months, no one's allowed to buy fish from Goyim in order to force them to bring down the prices. All their stock will spoil, they'll learn the lesson, and they won't, rip everybody off like this again. So says the Tzemach Tzedek, as follows. He says, Shabbos, Einik Shabbos is a deraisa. But eating fish on Shabbos is a derabbanan, not a derabbanan even, it's on Hagateva, it's a variation of Einik Shabbos. Says the Tzemach Tzedek, I have a raya from a Gemara in Tmura that says as follows. He says, one time, the sellers of kinim, the sellers of birds that women have to bring for their kabbanis in the Beis HaMikdash, raised the price from 1 coin to 5 coin. So Ba Rav Gamliel, and he says, I'm going to make a takana that women who normally were machmer that they bring 5 kinim only need to bring 1 bird. And basically he took the bottom out of the market. He destroyed the market. It says it wasn't nightfall before the price went down to a fifth of what it was. And Rav Gamliel came, he said, no problem, I'm going to boycott it. So says the Tzemach Tzedek, kinim is a deraisa when a woman has to bring these kabbanis. And this that we're machmer to bring 5 is a sabbath deraisa l'chumra. This is deraisa. And afal pikein, you see that Rav Gamliel was able to say, no, we could pause, no problem. You want to play like this? I'll pause. Boycott. Says the Tzemach Tzedek, avada, when it comes to fish on Shabbos, we can make a boycott. That's what the Tzemach Tzedek says. Now comes along the Beis Hillel in Hagah from the son of the Mechaber in the Sefer Beis Hillel, which is another very early Sefer, and says that he has a kasha on the Tzemach Tzedek's raya from Kinim, which a lot of people have a kasha. And then he says, but the bezed that the Tzemach Tzedek wrote that achilas dagam on Shabbos is just the Indian taiv. Bezed he made a mistake. Achilas dagam on Shabbos is a deraisa, he says. And he doesn't bring him a car for it. And the Baal HaTanya in Siman Reish Mem Beis in Hilchos Shabbos in the Kuntres Achron, Baal HaTanya brings Hagah mi Ben Beis Hillel, and he says that the Ben Beis Hillel says that achilas dagam on Shabbos is a deraisa, and it ain't. He says, I looked, there's no, the Baal HaTanya writes in Kuntres Achron over here, he says, Hine b'noi shel Beis Hillel kasav b'Hagah de dafka ad shlish, he says, Dag muchiv gam mi deraisa, ayin sham, hu tamua ma'od, she Rambam v'Shulchan Aruch, hishmet chiv deraisa. For some reason, all the codifiers of halacha, the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, they were malamayim from this chiv deraisa that the Beis Hillel is talking about. It says it's not a chiv deraisa, it's just an Inyan, al pi Kabbalah, al pi the Zayir, al pi the Kisvei Arizal. So the Baal HaTanya is cutting it down to size a little bit and saying it's Indian type. But akapanim you see, ateichen advar magid. The foods that we're supposed to eat could be given a tremendous chaymer, severity. So it's zulu mazu. What you're not supposed to eat is very detrimental, and what you are supposed to eat is very beneficial. Now, if you want to say it's the mashal that Tzemach Tzedek used to say, not this Tzemach, now back to the Lubavitcher Tzemach Tzedek. The Lubavitcher Tzemach Tzedek used to say that achilas kasha, the eating of kasha on Shabbos is a deraisa. And no, not a deraisa, halacha mishmei Sinai. He says, I can't tell you where, but it's a halacha mishmei Sinai to eat kasha on Shabbos. If you look in Chassidish Svarim, that food, I have one at home, from a square guy about all the different foods. It's amazing, off the charts. The significance in everything that comes on a Shabbos table is significant. Which, whether or not you want to take it to the chaymer that's being ascribed to it, or you just want to say, it's a beautiful thing that everything is deliberate and intentional, and every food that's on a Shabbos table is on purpose. So, b'chol we'll use this as a hakdama to the inyan of achila, of food, and its significance. Now, over the next few weeks, I'll move on to some of the specifics. I think next week we'll start with fish, because we're ending with fish, so we'll start with fish, and we'll continue from there.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.